The morning Era realized she was carrying the Alpha King's child, she was standing barefoot in the kitchen of her cousin's cabin, staring at a cup of tea she could not bring herself to drink. The scent turned her stomach. Everything turned her stomach now. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling nothing yet but the flutter of panic beneath her ribs, and tried to count back the days. 3 weeks since that night. 3 weeks since Veyron had claimed her in the firelight of the gathering hall, his mouth on her throat, his voice a low rasp against her ear, promising things she'd been foolish enough to believe. 3 weeks since he'd left before dawn, without a word, and she had not seen him since. If stories like this one speak to the parts of your heart you keep quiet, please subscribe so you never miss another. Ara set the cup down carefully and walked to the window. Outside, the autumn forest stretched golden and rust-red toward the distant peaks, beautiful and indifferent. Her breath fogged the glass. She had always been a practical wolf, not given to dreaming or hoping for things beyond her station. She was low-ranked, unremarkable, the kind of packmate who kept her head down and her duties simple. Veyron was the Alpha King. She should have known better. She should have known one night would be all he'd ever give her, no matter what his wolf had whispered into hers while they'd been tangled together in the dark. Her cousin Lena appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a cloth, her pale brows drawn together. "You're green again," Lena said quietly. Ara tried to smile. "I'm fine. You're not." Lena crossed the room and took Ara's face gently between her hands, studying her with the careful attention of someone who had raised 3 pups of her own. "How late are you?" Ara's throat tightened. She couldn't lie to Lena. She didn't have the strength left for it. 2 weeks, she whispered. Lena's expression shifted, softening into something that was equal parts sorrow and understanding. She pulled Ara into her arms and held her while the tears finally came, silent and exhausting. "Does he know?" Lena asked after a long moment. Ara shook her head against her cousin's shoulder. "He's gone. He hasn't come back. I don't think he meant for it to be more than that one night." Lena stroked her hair and said nothing for a while. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but edged with worry. "If you're carrying his child, Ara, he will know eventually. The bond doesn't lie. His wolf will sense it. Then I'll be gone before he comes looking." Lena pulled back, her hands firm on Ara's shoulders. "Gone? Where?" "Away from Packlands. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can raise the baby without questions." "And if he searches for you?" Ara met her cousin's eyes, her own still wet but clear now, determined. "Then he'll find a woman who's already made her choice." She spent the next 2 days packing what little she owned into a single worn travel bag. Clothes that didn't fit anymore. A few books. The silver comb her mother had left her before she'd passed, years ago. Lena tried to talk her out of it more than once, but Ara's mind was made. She would not raise this child in the shadow of a man who had taken what he wanted and vanished. She would not wait around, hoping Veyron might remember her name. On the 3rd morning, before the sun had fully risen, Ara slipped out of the cabin and started walking south. The forest was quiet except for the soft crunch of her boots on the leaf-strewn path and the occasional call of a distant bird. She kept her pace steady, her hand resting now and then on her still flat belly, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'll keep you safe. I'll make sure you have enough. You won't grow up wondering why you weren't wanted." The border town of Whittle's Cross sat nestled in a crook of the valley where Packlands met free territory, a place where wolves and humans traded and lived side by side without much fuss. Ara arrived on foot just after midday, tired and hungry, her hair tied back under a faded scarf. No one looked twice at her. She was just another traveler, another face in a town that saw dozens every week. She found work by evening. The inn at the center of town needed someone to help in the kitchen and keep the guest rooms tidy. And the owner, a broad-shouldered human woman named Essie, asked only 2 questions. Could Heir cook, and could she start tomorrow? Ara said yes to both. Essie handed her a key to a narrow room on the 2nd floor and told her meals came with the job. That night, Ara lay on the thin mattress and stared up at the ceiling beams, her hand curved protectively over her stomach. She had made it. She was free. She told herself that over and over until she almost believed it. The days folded into one another with a rhythm that was almost comforting. She woke early, helped Essie prepare breakfast for the guests, cleaned rooms while the sun climbed higher, and spent her afternoons chopping vegetables or stirring pots over the wide hearth in the kitchen. The work was simple. The pay was modest but fair. No one asked her where she'd come from or why she'd come alone. But the sickness got worse. Some mornings she could barely keep water down, and she learned to keep a basin close and her movements slow. Essie noticed, of course, but said nothing. It was Marin who finally cornered her. Marin was the town's healer, a small, sharp-eyed wolf well into her 60s, who came to the inn twice a week to trade herbs and tinctures for bread and gossip. She had a way of looking at people that made it clear she saw more than they wanted to show. One afternoon, while Ara was folding linens in the back hallway, Marin appeared beside her without a sound. "You're carrying," Marin said quietly. It wasn't a question. Ara froze, a pillowcase clutched in both hands. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Marin's gaze was steady and not unkind. "How far along?" Ara swallowed hard. 2 months, maybe a little more. Marin nodded slowly, her weathered fingers tapping thoughtfully against the small leather satchel slung over her shoulder. "And the father?" Ara looked down at the linen in her hands and said nothing. Marin sighed. "If you're hiding from him, girl, you'd better pray he's not the kind who comes looking." Ara's chest tightened. "He won't," she whispered. Marin's expression softened, but there was something in her eyes that looked like pity. "We'll see," she said quietly, and then she turned and walked back toward the kitchen, leaving Ara alone in the dim hallway with her heart pounding and her hands shaking. That night, Ara dreamed of Veyron. She dreamed of his hands on her skin, his voice rough and low in her ear, the way his wolf had risen to meet hers like they'd been carved from the same ancient stone. She woke with tears on her cheeks and the taste of regret sharp on her tongue. And somewhere far to the north, in the hall of the Alpha King, Veyron stood at a window staring out into the dark, his wolf restless and hungry beneath his skin. He had searched for her, he had sent trackers, called in favors, walked the edges of packlands himself hoping to catch her scent on the wind. But Ara had vanished, and now his wolf would not let him rest. Something was wrong, something was missing. He pressed his palm flat against the cold glass and closed his eyes, letting the bond hum faintly in his chest like a half-remembered song. "Where are you?" Marin came back 2 days later, this time with a small cloth bundle, tied with string. She found Ara in the larder counting jars of preserves, her movements slow and deliberate, one hand braced against the shelf for balance. The healer set the bundle down on the wooden counter and waited until Ara turned around. "Ginger root," Marin said simply. "Steep it in hot water, sip it slow. It'll help with the sickness." Ara stared at the bundle, her throat tight. "I didn't ask for your help." "No," Marin agreed, "but you need it all the same." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The larder smelled of dried herbs and old wood, and somewhere beyond the door, Ara could hear Essie humming while she kneaded dough. Marin stepped closer, her voice dropping to something gentler. "I've delivered more babes than I can count, girl. I know what fear looks like, and I know what shame looks like, too." Ara's jaw tightened. I'm not ashamed. Then what are you? The question landed softly, but it cut deep. Ara looked away, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. I'm trying to survive, she whispered. Maren nodded slowly, her weathered face creased with understanding. Then let me help you do that. You don't have to carry this alone. Something inside Ara cracked open. She sank down onto the low stool in the corner and pressed both hands to her face, her shoulders shaking with the weight of everything she'd been holding back. Maren crouched beside her, one thin hand resting lightly on Ara's knee. Tell me, she said quietly. And so Ara did. She told her about the gathering, about the way Veyron had looked at her across the hall like she was the only wolf in the room. She told her about the claiming, the heat of his mouth on her throat, the way his wolf had tangled with hers until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She told her about waking alone, about the silence that followed, about the slow, crushing realization that she had been nothing more than a moment's desire for a man who ruled an entire kingdom. I thought, Ara's voice broke, I thought he felt it too, the bond, the pull, but he left, and he never came back, and I can't raise this child waiting for a man who doesn't want us. Maren's expression was unreadable, but her hand stayed steady on Ara's knee. What's his name? She asked. Ara hesitated, then whispered it like a confession. Veyron. Maren went very still. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. The Alpha King. Ara nodded, fresh tears sliding hot down her cheeks. Maren exhaled slowly and sat back on her heels, her sharp eyes distant with thought. Girl, she said finally, you're carrying the heir to the Northern Throne. That's not something you can hide forever. His bloodline will call to the child. The bond will grow stronger as the babe does. And when it does, he will feel it. He will know. Ara shook her head, her hands curling protectively over her belly. I'll be gone by then. I'll go farther south, somewhere he'll never think to look. And if he's already looking? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and inevitable. Ara met Maren's gaze, her own eyes red-rimmed but fierce. Then I'll make sure he understands I don't need him, that we don't need him. Maren studied her for a long moment, then reached out and cupped Ara's face gently in both hands. You're stronger than you know, she said quietly. But strength won't be enough if he comes for you. You need to be ready. You need to know what you'll say when he asks why you ran. Ara's breath hitched. I ran because staying would have broken me. Maren's thumb brushed away a tear from Ara's cheek, her touch warm and steady. Then hold on to that, she said. And when the time comes, don't let him take it from you. She rose slowly, her knees creaking, and picked up the bundle of ginger root. She pressed it into Ara's hands and closed her fingers around it. Drink the tea, rest when you can, and if you need me, send word, I'll come. Ara nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. Maren left without another word, and Ara sat alone in the larder with the bundle clutched to her chest, the scent of ginger sharp and grounding in the cool, dim air. That night she made the tea, sipping it slowly while she sat by the small window in her room and watched the stars prick through the darkening sky. The ginger helped. The nausea eased enough that she could eat. A little bread with butter, and for the first time in days she felt almost steady. But the fear didn't leave. It sat low in her belly alongside the child, a constant hum of dread that whispered the same question over and over. What will you do if he finds you? She didn't have an answer. Not yet. The weeks that followed settled into a fragile routine. Vera worked her shifts at the inn, moving carefully through the hours, her body changing in small ways she tried not to notice. Her breasts were tender. Her appetite shifted, craving things she'd never wanted before: salt, bitter greens, cold water in the middle of the night. And the bond, faint but undeniable, pulsed somewhere deep in her chest like a second heartbeat. She tried to ignore it. She tried to bury it under work and exhaustion and the steady rhythm of survival. But some nights, when the inn was quiet and the fire burned low, she would lie awake and feel it thrumming softly beneath her ribs. And she wondered if, somewhere far to the north, Veyron felt it too. Marin visited often, always with some excuse: herbs to trade, a tincture Essie had requested, a question about a guest's ailment. But Ara knew the truth. Marin was watching over her, and despite herself, Ara was grateful. One afternoon, while Ara was sweeping the front steps of the inn, a trio of wolves passed through town on horseback. They were northern wolves. She could tell by their scent and the way they carried themselves: proud, watchful, unafraid. One of them glanced her way as they rode past, his gaze lingering just long enough to make her pulse spike with panic. But he didn't stop. He didn't recognize her. She was nobody to him, just another face in a border town far from the capital. Ara finished sweeping and went back inside, her hands trembling. That night, she dreamed of Veyron again. This time he was standing in the center of a great hall, firelight casting shadows across his face, his eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for something lost. She tried to call out to him, but no sound came, and when his gaze finally found hers, he didn't see her. He looked right through her, as if she'd never existed at all. She woke, gasping, her hand pressed hard against her belly, the bond flaring hot and desperate in her chest. "I'm here," she whispered into the dark. "I'm still here." But she didn't know if she was speaking to the child or to the man who had claimed her and left her behind. Winter was coming. Ara could feel it in the air, in the way the mornings grew sharper and the sky turned pale and heavy with the promise of snow. She would need warmer clothes soon. She would need to decide how long she could stay before her condition became impossible to hide. Marin had offered her a place in her cottage on the edge of town when the time came, somewhere quiet and safe to bring the child into the world. Ara hadn't accepted yet. She wasn't ready to admit she would still be here when that day arrived. But the bond was growing stronger. She felt it now, not just at night, but during the day. A pull, a hum, a sense of something vast and restless moving closer. And one cold, bright morning, when Ara stepped into the inn's common room to begin her work, she felt it shift. The bond flared hot and urgent in her chest, stealing her breath. Her wolf rose to the surface, alert and trembling. And somewhere, not far now, Veyron's wolf answered. Ara gripped the edge of the bar to steady herself, her knuckles white against the worn wood. The bond had never felt like this before, bright and fierce, like a flame catching dry tinder. Her wolf whined low in her chest, caught between longing and terror. Essie was in the kitchen, humming while she worked, unaware of the way Ara's world had just tilted on its axis. Ara forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale and exhale until the dizziness passed. He's close. The thought should have sent her running. Instead, she found herself rooted to the spot, one hand drifting instinctively to her belly, where the slight curve was still hidden beneath the loose apron she wore. The front door of the inn opened, letting in a gust of cold air and the low murmur of male voices. Ara didn't turn around. She busied herself wiping down the already clean bar, her movements mechanical, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Is the innkeeper available?" one of the voices asked, low and polite but edged with authority. Ara recognized that tone. Northern pack. High rank. She kept her head down and gestured toward the kitchen. "She'll be out in a moment. Can I get you something while you wait?" "Just information," the voice said, closer now. Ara's hands stilled on the cloth. She could feel eyes on her, the weight of scrutiny she'd been trying to avoid for months. "We're looking for someone," the wolf continued. "A young woman traveling alone. Brown hair, green eyes, low rank. She would have passed through here weeks ago, maybe longer." Ara's throat closed. Her wolf pressed against the edges of her control, desperate and afraid. She turned slowly, the damp cloth still clutched in one hand, and forced herself to meet the stranger's gaze. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had seen too many battles and won most of them. His eyes were pale gray, sharp and assessing, but there was no recognition in them when he looked at her. She was exactly what she'd tried to become, invisible. "No one like that," Ara said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "We get a lot of travelers, hard to keep track." The wolf studied her for a moment longer, then nodded and stepped back. "If you hear anything, send word north. The Alpha King is offering a reward." Ara's stomach dropped. "A reward," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "For information leading to her whereabouts. She's important to him." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward, disturbing everything. Ara managed a nod, her face carefully blank. "I'll keep that in mind." The wolf turned and walked back toward his companions waiting near the door, and Ara exhaled in a shaking rush. Her hands were trembling so badly, she had to press them flat against the bar to keep them still. Essie emerged from the kitchen a moment later, wiping flour from her hands, her round face creased with curiosity. "What did they want?" "Just asking after someone," Ara said, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. "They're gone now." Essie hummed thoughtfully and went back to her work, but Ara remained frozen behind the bar, her mind racing. "He's looking for me. He's been looking." She'd thought he'd forgotten. She'd built walls around that belief, fortified them with bitterness and hurt, until they felt solid enough to hold her upright. But now those walls were cracking, and she didn't know what lay beneath. Marin found her an hour later in the laundry room behind the inn, folding sheets with slow, mechanical precision. The healer closed the door softly behind her and leaned against it, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "You heard," Marin said. It wasn't a question. Ara's hands stilled on the linen. "They were here, northern wolves, asking about me." "I know. I saw them leave." Ara looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "He's searching for me, Marin. He's offering a reward. He told them I'm important to him." Marin crossed the small room and took the sheet gently from Ara's hands, setting it aside. "And what do you think that means?" Ara shook her head, her breath hitching. "I don't know. Maybe he just wants to make sure I don't tell anyone what happened. Maybe it's about control, or protecting his reputation, or maybe he meant what his wolf told yours that night." Marin interrupted quietly. "Maybe he's been looking because he can't stop." Ara pressed both hands to her face, her shoulders shaking. "Then why didn't he come back? Why did he leave me there like I was nothing?" Marin's expression softened with something that looked like old grief, like she'd once asked herself the same question. "I don't know, girl. Men, especially alphas, are complicated creatures. They carry the weight of their wolves and their crowns, and sometimes they make choices that hurt the people they're trying to protect." "I don't need his protection," Ara whispered fiercely. "I needed him to stay." "Then you need to tell him that," Marin said. "Not me." Ara dropped her hands and met the healer's gaze, her own eyes red and raw. What if he's only looking because of the bond? What if it's just his wolf, and the rest of him doesn't care at all. Maren reached out and cupped Era's face gently, the same way she had weeks ago in the larder. "Then you'll know," she said, "and you'll decide what comes next. But you can't hide forever, Ara. The child is growing. The bond is growing. And sooner or later, he's going to feel it pull him straight to your door." Ara's hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective and afraid. "I'm not ready." "No one ever is," Maren said softly. "But ready or not, it's coming. So you'd better decide what you're going to say when he stands in front of you and asks why you ran." She let her hands fall away and stepped back, giving Ara space to breathe. "I'll be at my cottage if you need me," Maren said. "Day or night, don't try to do this alone." Ara nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Maren left quietly, and Ara stood alone in the laundry room, surrounded by clean white sheets and the faint scent of soap, her world narrowing to the steady thrum of the bond in her chest and the life growing beneath her heart. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, one hand resting on the small curve of her belly, feeling the bond hum and shift like something alive. It was stronger now than it had ever been. It pulled at her ribs, tugged at her wolf, whispered his name in a voice that wasn't quite hers. Veyron. She closed her eyes and let herself remember the way he'd looked at her across the gathering hall, his dark eyes bright with something fierce and hungry, the way his hand had curled around the back of her neck, gentle and possessive at once. The way his voice had roughened when he'd pressed his mouth to her throat and murmured, "You're mine." She'd believed him. And that was the part that hurt most of all. Somewhere far to the north, Veyron stood alone in his chambers, his hands braced against the stone sill of the window, his wolf clawing at the inside of his skin. The bond had flared hours ago, sharp and undeniable, and it hadn't faded. She was close. After months of searching, after sending trackers to every corner of Packlands and beyond, after lying awake night after night with her absence like a wound he couldn't close, she was finally close. His beta had reported back from the border towns earlier that evening, frustrated and empty-handed. But Veyron's wolf didn't care about reports. It cared only about the pull in his chest, the scent he could almost taste on the back of his tongue, the certainty that if he walked south right now, he would find her. He pushed away from the window and grabbed his cloak from the chair. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He didn't wait for dawn. He simply shifted and ran, his wolf powerful and relentless beneath the cold light of the moon, following the bond like a thread pulled taut across the dark. And in a small room above a quiet inn, Ara woke suddenly, her hand pressed to her chest, the bond blazing bright and urgent. She sat up, her heart pounding, her wolf rising to meet whatever was coming. And she knew, with a certainty that stole her breath, that she was out of time. Veyron arrived at the inn just after dawn, still in human form, but barely holding his wolf in check. The bond sang in his chest, louder than it had been in months, pulling him forward with a force that made his hands shake. He pushed, opened the heavy oak door, and stepped into the common room, his presence filling the space like a storm rolling in off the mountains. The few early risers seated at the tables looked up, their conversations dying mid-sentence. They knew what he was. They could feel it in the air, the weight of an alpha's authority, the danger that clung to him like a second skin. Essie emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression carefully neutral, despite the wariness in her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. Veyron's gaze swept the room, searching, his wolf prowling just beneath the surface. "I'm looking for someone," he said, his voice low and rough from the run. "A wolf?" "Female. She would have come through here weeks ago." Essie's face remained blank. "We get a lot of travelers." "Not like her." The words came out sharper than he'd intended, edged with frustration and something closer to desperation. He took a breath, forcing himself to steady. "Please, it's important." Before Essie could answer, movement caught his eye. A figure stepped into the common room from the narrow hallway that led to the back of the inn, carrying a tray of clean mugs. She was slight, her dark hair tied back under a simple scarf, her clothes worn and practical. She kept her gaze down, focused on her task, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to go unnoticed. But Veyron's wolf knew her instantly. The bond flared so bright, it nearly drove him to his knees. His breath stopped. His vision narrowed to her and only her, every instinct in his body roaring the same word over and over. Ara froze mid-step, the tray trembling in her hands. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. She felt him the same way he felt her, the bond between them blazing to life after months of painful silence. Her wolf whined, caught between the urge to run and the desperate need to close the distance between them. Veyron took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides. "Ara!" Her name left his mouth like a prayer and a command all at once. She flinched at the sound of it, her shoulders drawing in, but she still didn't look at him. "You're mistaken," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "My name is Mela." "No," Veyron said, his voice rougher now, cracking at the edges. "It's not." Essie glanced between them, her weathered face creased with confusion and concern. "Is there a problem here?" "No," Ara said quickly, setting the tray down on the nearest table with shaking hands. "No problem. I need to finish my work." She turned and walked toward the back hallway, her steps quick and unsteady. Veyron moved without thinking, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "Ara, wait. Don't," she said, her voice breaking on the word. But she didn't stop walking. Veyron followed her into the dim corridor, his wolf clawing at his control, demanding he reach for her, hold her, never let her go again. The hallway was narrow and cool, lined with shelves of linens and supplies, the air smelling faintly of lavender and wood smoke. Ara kept walking toward the back door, her breath coming fast and shallow. "Please," Veyron said behind her, his voice raw. "Just stop. Talk to me." She reached for the door handle, her fingers closing around the cold iron. But before she could pull it open, Veyron's hand closed gently around her wrist. Not tight, not forceful, just enough to stop her. Ara went completely still, her heart hammering against her ribs. The bond pulsed between them, hot and undeniable, and she could feel his wolf pressing against hers, searching, questioning, confused. "Why did you run?" Veyron asked, his voice barely above a whisper now. Ara closed her eyes, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. "Let me go." "I can't," he said, and the honesty in his voice nearly broke her. "I've been looking for you for months, Ara. I searched everywhere. I thought you'd rejected the bond. I thought you didn't want—" "I didn't want to be forgotten," she interrupted, her voice shaking with anger and grief. "I didn't want to wake up alone and spend weeks wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing." Veyron's grip on her wrist loosened, his thumb brushing gently over her pulse point. "You didn't imagine it," he said quietly. "I swear to you, Ara, you didn't." She turned, then, finally meeting his eyes, and the sight of him after all these months stole what little breath she had left. He looked different. Thinner, maybe. tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. His dark hair was longer, falling across his forehead, and his eyes, those fierce, hungry eyes she remembered, were shadowed with something that looked like pain. "Then why did you leave?" she asked, her voice breaking. Veyron's jaw tightened, his hand still resting lightly on her wrist. "I had to. There was an attack on the eastern border. I got word just before dawn and I had to go. I thought I'd be back in a few days. I thought you'd wait." Ara shook her head, fresh tears streaking her face. "You didn't tell me. You didn't leave word. You just vanished." "I know," Veyron said, and the regret in his voice was thick enough to choke on. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have woken you. I should have explained. But I thought—" He stopped, his gaze searching her face. "I thought the bond would be enough." He finished quietly. "I thought you'd feel it, and know I was coming back." Ara pulled her wrist free and wrapped both arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces of her heart that were threatening to shatter all over again. "The bond isn't enough," she whispered. "Not when I'm low-ranked and you're the Alpha King. Not when I don't know if you claimed me because you wanted me, or because your wolf needed." She broke off, her breath hitching. Veyron took a step closer, his hands hovering near her shoulders but not touching, giving her space even though it clearly cost him. "I claimed you because I wanted you," he said, his voice fierce and certain. "My wolf and I were in agreement, Ara. We've been in agreement since the moment I saw you across that hall." Ara's breath shuddered out of her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it ached. But then his gaze shifted, dropping briefly to her midsection, and she saw the exact moment everything changed. His eyes widened. His nostrils flared as he caught the scent she'd been trying so hard to mask, the subtle shift in her chemistry, the faint sweetness that clung to her skin now. His wolf surged forward, recognition and shock flashing across his face. "Ara!" he breathed, his voice gone rough and disbelieving. "Are you—" She took a step back, one hand moving instinctively to cover the small curve of her belly that was barely visible beneath her loose work dress. But it was too late. He'd seen. He knew. Veyron's gaze locked on her hand, on the protective way her fingers spread across her stomach, and the air between them went absolutely still. When he looked up again, his eyes were blazing. Shock and anger and something raw and unnameable all tangled together. "How long?" he asked, his voice shaking. Ara's chin lifted, even as tears continued to fall. 3 months. Veyron's breath left him in a rush, his hand coming up to grip the back of his neck as if he could physically hold himself together. 3 months, he repeated, the words barely audible. "You've been carrying my child for 3 months, and you didn't tell me. I didn't think you'd care," Ara said, her voice stronger now, edged with defiance. Veyron's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her wolf whimper. "Didn't think I'd care?" he said, his voice rising. "Ara, you're carrying my heir. You're—" He stopped, his jaw working as he fought for control. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less fierce. "You're mine," he said. "You and the child both. Do you understand that?" Ara's hands curled into fists at her sides. "I'm not yours just because you claimed me once and left. I'm not yours just because I'm carrying your child. Then what will it take?" Veyron asked, and suddenly he was close again, so close she could feel the heat radiating off him. "Tell me what I have to do, Ara. Tell me how to fix this." She looked up at him, her heart breaking and mending and breaking again all at once. "I don't know if you can." Veyron's wolf was barely contained beneath his skin, every instinct screaming at him to reach for her, to pull her close and never let go. But he forced himself to stay still, to give her the space she clearly needed, even though it felt like tearing himself apart. Ara's words hung between them, sharp and final. "I don't know if you can." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling at his sides. "Let me try," he said, his voice rough. "Please, Ara, just let me try." She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can't go through this again. I can't let myself hope and then watch you leave." "I'm not leaving," Veyron said, the words coming out fierce and absolute. "Not now. Not ever." "You don't know that," Ara whispered. "You're the Alpha King. You have responsibilities. A kingdom to protect. What happens the next time there's an attack? What happens when duty calls and I'm—" Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. Veyron moved then, closing the distance between them in one careful step. He didn't grab her. He didn't force her into his arms. He simply stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the steady presence that her wolf had been crying out for all these months. "What happens," Veyron said quietly, "is that I make sure you know exactly where I'm going and when I'll be back. What happens is I don't leave you alone wondering if I'm ever coming home. What happens is I put you first, Ara, the way I should have from the beginning." Ara looked up at him, her green eyes bright with tears and something fragile that might have been hope. "And the child?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What about the child?" Veyron's gaze dropped to where her hand still rested protectively over her belly. Something shifted in his expression, softening and sharpening at the same time. "Can I?" He hesitated, his throat working. "May I?" Ara's breath caught. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't speak, her wolf torn between fear and desperate longing. Then, slowly, she dropped her hand away from her stomach. Permission. Veyron sank to his knees in front of her, his movements careful and reverent, as if approaching something sacred. He looked up at her once more, seeking final consent, and when she gave the smallest nod, he reached out with shaking hands and placed his palm gently over the slight curve beneath her dress. The bond flared white-hot between them, so bright Ara gasped. But it wasn't just the bond anymore. It was something new, something they'd created together. A third heartbeat, faint but undeniable, pulsing softly beneath Veyron's hand. His eyes widened, his breath leaving him in a rush. "I can feel—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "Ara, I can feel them." Ara's hand came up to rest over his, her fingers trembling. "I know," she whispered. Veyron bowed his head, pressing his forehead gently against her belly, his shoulders shaking. When he spoke again, his voice was raw, stripped of every wall and defense. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I made you think you didn't matter. I'm sorry you had to carry this alone." Ara's free hand moved to his hair, her fingers threading through the dark strands. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice thick with tears. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if you'd want us." Veyron lifted his head, his eyes fierce and wet. "I want you," he said. "Both of you. More than anything I've ever wanted in my life." He rose slowly, his hand still resting over the place where their child grew, his other hand coming up to cup her face. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said quietly. "I know I hurt you, but if you'll let me, Ara, I swear I will spend the rest of my life proving that you and this child are everything to me." Ara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. "I don't want promises," she whispered. "I just want the truth." "Then here's the truth," Veyron said, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. "I've been half alive since the night I left you. I've searched every territory, sent trackers to every border town, walked the edges of packlands until my wolf was raw from it. And every night I felt the bond pulling at me like a wound that wouldn't heal." He paused, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. I thought I'd lost you, he said, his voice breaking. I thought you'd rejected the bond and I'd never find you again. And it nearly destroyed me. Ara's breath hitched, her hands coming up to grip the front of his shirt. I didn't reject it, she said. I tried to, I wanted to, but I couldn't. Neither could I. Veyron murmured. My wolf wouldn't let me rest. It knew you were out there somewhere, and it wouldn't stop until we found you. They stood like that for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, breathing in sync, the bond humming steady and warm between them. Then Ara pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his face. What happens now? She asked. Veyron's jaw tightened with determination. Now I make this right, he said. Properly. He stepped back, keeping one hand lightly on her arm as if afraid she might disappear if he let go completely. Marin? He called, his voice carrying down the hallway. Ara's eyes widened in surprise. How did you? I can smell her, Veyron said quietly. She's been watching from the kitchen since I arrived. Footsteps sounded on the wooden floor, and Marin appeared in the hallway, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with a single assessing glance. Alpha King? She said, her tone neutral but respectful. Veyron inclined his head. You're the healer who's been caring for Ara. It wasn't a question. Marin nodded slowly. I am. Then you're a witness, Veyron said, his voice taking on the formal weight of authority. And I need you to hear what I'm about to say. He turned back to Ara, his hand moving to take hers, his fingers threading through hers with gentle certainty. Ara, he said, his voice clear and steady despite the emotion roughening the edges. I claim you before witness, not as a moment's desire, not as something fleeting or half-meant. I claim you as my mate, my equal, the mother of my child and the keeper of my heart. Ara's breath stopped, her eyes wide and disbelieving. Veyron's grip on her hand tightened, anchoring her. I vow before Marin, before the bond that ties us, before the child you carry, that you and they are mine to protect, to provide for, to cherish. And this time, Ara, I will not let you go. Marin stepped forward, her weathered face creased with something that might have been approval. I stand witness to this claim, she said formally. Let it be known that the Alpha King Veyron has claimed Ara as mate and recognized the child she carries as his rightful heir. The words settled into the air like a vow made solid, binding and unbreakable. Ara stared up at Veyron, her chest tight, her wolf singing with a joy so fierce it brought fresh tears to her eyes. You mean it, she whispered, not quite a question. I mean it, Veyron said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Every word. Ara's knees went weak, and Veyron caught her immediately, his arm coming around her waist to steady her. I've got you, he murmured against her hair. I've got you both. And for the first time in months, surrounded by the warmth of his presence and the steady truth of his vow, Ara let herself believe it might actually be true. Ara stood in the narrow hallway of the inn, wrapped in Veyron's arms, and for the first time in 3 months, felt like she could breathe. The bond pulsed warm and steady between them, no longer the aching wound it had been, but something whole and right. Veyron's hand moved gently over her back in slow circles, his chin resting on top of her head. She could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, strong and even, anchoring her to this moment. We need to get you somewhere safe, he said quietly, somewhere you can rest properly, where the child can be protected. Ara pulled back slightly to look up at him. I have Marin's cottage. She offered it to me weeks ago. Veyron's brow furrowed. A cottage in a border town isn't. I'm not going north, Ara interrupted, her voice firmer than she'd expected. Not yet. She saw the flash of pain cross his face, quickly masked. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he cupped her face gently in both hands. Tell me what you need, he said. Tell me what will make you feel safe. Ara's throat tightened at the raw sincerity in his voice. She'd expected commands, demands that she return to the capital immediately. But he was asking. He was listening. "Time," she said softly. "I need time to trust this. To trust you." Veyron nodded slowly, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Then I'll give you time. But I'm not leaving you again, Ara. If you stay here, I stay here." "You can't," she said. "You have a kingdom to run." "I have a beta who's more than capable of managing things for a while," Veyron replied. "And I have a mate who needs me here more than they need me there." The word "Sampla" sent a shiver through her. It sounded different now than it had 3 months ago. Solid. Real. Chosen. Marin cleared her throat from where she still stood a few paces away. "If I may," she said, her tone dry but not unkind, "I have a suggestion." Both Ara and Veyron turned to look at her. "My cottage is small but private," Marin continued. "There's a room you can use, girl, and space for the Alpha King if he's determined to stay close. It'll keep you out of sight of the curious while you both figure out what comes next." Ara glanced up at Veyron, searching his face. "You'd really stay?" "I'd sleep on the floor outside your door if that's what it took," Veyron said simply. Something in Ara's chest cracked open. She nodded, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "All right, Marin's cottage?" Veyron's relief was visible, tension draining from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said quietly. Marin nodded briskly. "I'll go ahead and prepare things. You two finish up here and come when you're ready." She fixed Veyron with a sharp look. "And Alpha King? Try not to make her cry again." Veyron's mouth twitched despite himself. "I'll do my best." Marin left through the back door, and Ara found herself alone with Veyron once more. The hallway seemed smaller now, the air between them thick with everything still unsaid. "I need to tell Essie I'm leaving," Ara said. "She's been kind to me. I owe her that much." Veyron nodded. "I'll wait here." Ara hesitated, then reached up and touched his face briefly, her fingers brushing along his jaw. "Don't disappear while I'm gone." His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his cheek. "I won't," he promised. "You have my word." She held his gaze for another moment, then turned and walked back toward the common room. Her legs felt unsteady, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. Essie was behind the bar wiping down mugs, her expression carefully neutral when Ara approached. But there was concern in her eyes, and questions she was too polite to voice. "I'm leaving," Ara said quietly. "I'm sorry for the short notice." Essie set down the mug she'd been holding and came around the bar. "Is that him, then? The one you've been running from?" Ara's throat tightened. "Yes." "And the babe?" Ara's hand moved to her belly, protective and instinctive. "His." Essie studied her for a long moment, then reached out and squeezed Ara's shoulder gently. "Then I hope he treats you better this time than he did the first." "I think he will," Ara whispered. "I think he wants to." Essie nodded slowly. "That's all we can ask for, isn't it? That they want to try." She pulled Ara into a brief, warm hug that smelled of bread and herbs and simple kindness. "You take care of yourself, Mela. Or Ara. Whoever you decide to be." Ara hugged her back, blinking hard against tears. "Thank you. For everything." When she returned to the hallway, Veyron was exactly where she'd left him, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and his eyes fixed on the spot where she'd disappeared. The relief on his face when he saw her made her chest ache. "Ready?" he asked. Ara nodded. "I need to get my things from upstairs. It won't take long." "I'll come with you." They climbed the narrow stairs together, Veyron's presence warm and solid behind her. Her room was small and plain, just a bed and a trunk, and a single window that looked out over the road. She knelt beside the trunk and began folding the few clothes she owned, moving slowly, her hands careful despite the way they trembled. Veyron crouched beside her, watching quietly. "Let me," he said after a moment, taking a shirt gently from her hands. They packed in silence, the simple domestic act somehow more intimate than any touch had been. When the trunk was closed and latched, Veyron lifted it easily and stood. "Is this everything?" he asked. Ara looked around the little room that had been her refuge for months. "Yes, that's everything." Veyron held out his free hand to her. "Then let's go home." "Marin's cottage isn't home," Ara said softly. "I know," Veyron replied. "But wherever you are is home enough for me." The words settled warm in her chest. She took his hand and let him lead her down the stairs and out the back door of the inn, into the cool morning air. Marin's cottage sat at the edge of town, half hidden by trees and surrounded by a garden that smelled of late autumn herbs. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line, and the windows glowed with soft firelight. Marin met them at the door, her expression brisk but not unkind. "Room's ready. There's soup on the fire and clean linens on the bed. You'll want to rest, girl. You look half dead on your feet." Ara realized with a start that she was exhausted. The morning had been an endless storm of emotion, and now that it was over, her body was demanding its due. Veyron set the trunk down inside the door and turned to Ara, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Go lie down," he said quietly. "I'll be here when you wake." "Promise?" The word came out smaller than she'd intended. "I promise," Veyron said, and the certainty in his voice wrapped around her like armor. Marin led her to a small bedroom at the back of the cottage. The bed was narrow, but the blankets looked warm, and the window let in soft afternoon light that fell across the wooden floor in golden bars. "Sleep," Marin said. "Everything else can wait." Ara sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced her boots with clumsy fingers. When she lay down, the mattress felt softer than anything she'd slept on in months. She closed her eyes and felt the bond hum warm in her chest. Somewhere in the other room, Veyron's wolf answered. And for the first time since the night he'd claimed her and vanished, Ara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they would find their way through this together. The child stirred faintly beneath her heart, a flutter like wings. She was not alone anymore.